welcome back to CTN. I'm your host, Robert Van Sluten. This episode, we're going to finish up on custom views. Let's get started. In the previous episodes about views, I used this demo application to explain some of the view geometry. In this episode, I'm going to explain more about custom views and how to draw the background grid. Okay, I'm looking at the storyboard for the application I just ran. It's called Graph. It's an iPad only app and it will be on the website. You'll notice that I didn't do anything in the storyboard. There's no user interface design here at all. Everything's done programmatically. Now, let's take a look at the viewController.m. You've seen this previously, or a variant of this. In ViewDidLoad, I'm setting up the grid view. But you notice the first line of code here, I'm changing the background color of the self.view, in other words, the background view. I'm setting it equal to black. Previously, we did that through the attribute inspector. Doing the standard thing where I create a rectangle, locating at 50-50, in this case it's 500 in size. And I have this class that I've defined, which we're going to go through, called CTN Grid View. I'm going to create it with the frame, and I'm going to add it as a subview to the background view. We covered this in the previous episode. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the next slide, and we're going to start talking about the code for the view itself. Now, if we go over and take a look at the files that are in this project, I've actually created two different subclasses of UI view, CTN view and CTN graph view. Now, CTN view, I didn't modify any code. It's just really there to show you what you get when you do that. Let's take a look in the .m. You get an initializer. Now, this is your standard initializer. It returns an ID, which is simply just a pointer to an object. And basic rule is you always call the superclass's initializer, and you set self equal to what gets returned. Now, you should test to determine whether that did not come back nil, because there could be several reasons. And by just simply saying if self, because nil is 0, then you'll enter the if leg if it's non-nil, and you write some code. You could do an else and an error leg. Then you simply return self. Now there's one other method down here, but it's completely commented out. Void, draw rec, and you get a rectangle passed in. Now, this is where you would implement specialized drawing code. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to take a look at that in Graph View. Okay, let's take a look at drawRec for the Graph View class. An argument that's passed in, there's a rectangle. And generally, this rectangle is the bounds of the view. In other words, it's the whole thing. However, it is possible that you only need to redraw part of a view because there could be overlapping. And if the drawing algorithm is complicated, there could be efficiencies in only doing part of it. But in this case, the rec is the entire bounds. However, even though that's the case, I create my own rec and I just simply get self.bounds, which is the bounds of the current view. There is this concept of a context, and the context is what you're drawing in. Now, there can be multiple contexts that can be pushed on stacks. You can do some rather complicated things with that. for our purposes, there is the context. UI color is context aware. If I set UI color to gray color, I can say set fill, and that'll fill the current context with gray. However, to draw it, I have to say rec fill my rec. I want to draw lines because I am drawing a grid. So I want to set the color of the lines, and UI color again, white color, set, we'll set the line color. Now I want to get the context. I actually have to start dealing with the context. Now Core Graphics is basically a C interface. So I have to get this thing which is of type CG context. And I do that by calling UI graphics get current context function. Now I want to set the line width. How wide is this line? What context? Well, I want to set the line width to 1.0. Now I want to draw horizontal and vertical lines, and I do this within one loop. And you can think of this as a pencil that you set down, you move to draw a line, and you pick it back up again. So this notion of moving to point, that is like moving a pencil for the particular context. Now we're talking about X and Y coordinates here. Now I'm going to let you think about this. Add line to point, in other words, you've moved the pencil. So you're drawing the various lines. Now, things have not been rendered yet. You go down and you say stroke path. I'll take stroke path, give it the context. It will then appear. Now there's one other line up here. I put in the initialization, set clear context before drawing equals no. In other words, I'm not telling the system to wipe out the context before this function is called at all, and this is just an efficiency thing. Okay, this function is something you never call yourself. You never call drawRec directly. It's for the system. Now you may ask, well, what if I want to change the content of my view? Well, in the view controller, you can choose to set needs display or set needs display rec on the view that you want redrawn. And there's a redrawer loop, there's an algorithm that determines when things are redrawn, and the system will redraw the view when it deems it's the best time. This seems rather nasty. We're back to inits now. Init methods are not invoked in objects in the storyboard. Well, okay, fine. I've implemented init, but you know, if I plunk that customized thing that I've made, initialization is never called. Well, there's another function. Instead, there's a method. Sorry, I'm using the word function. I should use the word method. There is a method called awakeFromNib, and that's where you would implement that initialization. You could put the same code in both of them, or write it in one place and then call it from both. You don't have to call super for awakeFromNib. Documentation. You should always look at it. I'm always giving you the overview. You should dig into details. You should take a look at object initialization. You should take a look at awakeFromNib. And of course, you should read and reread the documentation on UI view. And as a little bit of a challenge, you should have enough information now to plunk a red subview on top of the grid, put down some sliders, and start writing some code to move around the red subview. And just as a hint, you would play with the properties bounds and the properties center. Of course, the rotation situation is much more complicated, and we haven't actually delved into that. Thanks for watching.